The shrill voice hit me like a rusty nail scraping across glass. I froze mid-step, coffee in hand, and turned toward the sound. There she was, Karen, the self-proclaimed queen of the Willow Creek Homeowners Association, standing at the edge of a manicured lawn with a scowl that could peel paint. Her golden retriever barked at me like it knew I didn't belong. Except I did. I belonged there more than anyone else in that neighborhood. In fact, if we're getting technical, I owned every inch of the ground she was standing on. But Karen didn't know that. Not yet. A few months ago, I wouldn't have imagined I'd end up here, watching a woman in yoga pants and too much perfume wave a clipboard at me like she was a sheriff guarding the gates of paradise. But life's funny that way. It circles back, sometimes with a sense of irony sharp enough to draw blood. The truth is, Willow Creek was built on what used to be my grandfather's land. 30 acres of rich soil, old oak trees, and a winding creek that ran clear enough to see fish darting through the rocks. When he passed, my father sold most of it to a development company called High Ridge Properties, except for one 5-acre corner lot tucked behind the woods. Dad held on to that piece, the part closest to the creek, where he'd carved his initials into an oak as a boy. That little slice of land passed to me when he died 2 years ago. For a long time, I didn't do anything with it. It was peaceful, forgotten, almost sacred, until last spring, when I drove down to check on it and discovered that an entire neighborhood had been built practically on top of it. At first, I thought I was mistaken. The old fence line was gone, replaced by a smooth concrete path leading into Willow Creek Estates, one of those two perfect HOA communities with matching mailboxes and rules about what color you could paint your door. My property marker was still there, barely visible through the grass, and when I pulled out the deed, I felt my blood run cold. Half of their fancy community park, complete with picnic tables, a playground, and a private pond, was sitting squarely on my land. So no, I wasn't trespassing when I walked through that morning. I was reclaiming what was mine. Karen marched toward me, her expression carved in righteous indignation. "Sir, this is private property," she said, clutching her clipboard. "Residents only. I'm going to have to ask you to leave before I call security, or the police." I took a sip of my coffee, unbothered. "Actually," I said, "I think you're mistaken." "I'm not mistaken," she snapped. "This is part of the Willow Creek HOA. I've been president for 5 years. You don't live here." "You're right," I said, smiling faintly. "But you do, and you're standing on my land." Her face went blank for a moment, and then she laughed, a short, brittle sound. "Don't be ridiculous. This is HOA-managed property. Want to see the deed?" She didn't. She waved her hand dismissively and muttered something about crazies before storming off, dog in tow. I watched her go, every step sinking into ground her HOA technically didn't own. And that's when the idea began to take shape, slow, deliberate, like a seed pressing through soil. They wanted to play rules and boundaries. Fine. I'd show them what real ownership looked like. I spent the next week buried in county records and old plat maps. Every page confirmed what I already knew. 5 acres of Willow Creek Estates legally belonged to me. The developer had overbuilt, illegally, it seemed, and the HOA had been maintaining land they never owned. That included not just a park, but a section of the main walking path and 3 backyards that extended past the original survey line. Karen's backyard was one of them. When I realized that, I actually laughed out loud. It was too perfect. The next step was simple. I hired a surveyor. The look on the HOA board's faces when he showed up in a bright orange vest and started hammering new stakes into the ground was priceless. Karen came running out of her house, hair in curlers, slippers flapping. "What is the meaning of this?" she shrieked. The surveyor just shrugged and pointed at me. "Ask him. Here's the owner." She turned to me, jaw dropping. "This can't be legal." "Oh, it's legal," I said, handing her a copy of the property deed. "You're standing about 15 feet into my land. By the way, that fence of yours? It's on my side of the line." Her eyes darted toward her immaculate white fence, the one that framed her garden like a magazine cover. "That's impossible," she whispered. I gave a small, pitying smile. "Tell that to the county records." That night, I sat in my truck overlooking the park, watching the HOA meeting unfold under the gazebo lights. Karen was waving papers, gesturing wildly, while a handful of residents looked on in confusion. I could almost hear her from across the lawn. "He's lying. He's just trying to scam us." But they weren't so sure. One of them, a younger guy named Derek, I later learned, stood up and started reading from something on his tablet. Probably the same public records I'd emailed to the entire HOA board earlier that day. The meeting ended with shouting, red faces, and Karen storming off. I didn't need to see her expression to know she was furious. And that was just the beginning. Over the next month, I watched the HOA unravel piece by piece. They filed complaints with the county, tried to prove the deed was forged, and even attempted to get the city involved. Each time, the answer came back the same: the land is legally mine. Karen tried intimidation next. She'd follow me whenever I came to check the property, phone camera recording, narrating for her evidence log. "This man keeps trespassing," she'd say to the lens. "He's harassing residents." I'd just smile and wave. Then one day, I posted a bright red sign at the edge of the park. "Private property. No trespassing. Permission required for use. Owner, J. Mitchell." By the end of the day, Karen had called the police. The responding officer took one look at the paperwork I handed him, then turned to her. He said, "He's within his rights. This land's not part of your HOA." Karen's jaw dropped. But this is a community park." The officer shrugged. "Then you might want to talk to whoever sold you the house." It wasn't just about revenge anymore. It was about justice, about watching the people who thought they owned everything learn what it felt like to lose control. Still, part of me couldn't help wondering, how far would Karen go to keep her illusion intact? Because I knew people like her. They didn't just back down. They doubled down. And sure enough, one evening, as the sun dipped below the trees, I caught her sneaking across the property line. She had a can of spray paint in her hand and was scrawling something across my new sign. "Fake owner." I stepped out of the shadows. "Having fun." She froze, eyes wide. "You can't stop me. I'm protecting community property." I took a step closer, calm as ever. "Karen, if you set one more foot past that line, I'll have you charged with vandalism and trespassing. On my land." Her lip trembled. "You think you can just bully us?" "No," I said softly, "but I can make you pay rent." Her eyes flicked up in confusion. "Rent?" "Yep," I said, pulling a folded notice from my jacket. "Since you're technically occupying part of my property, your fence, your garden shed, that patch of lawn, you'll need to start paying for it. I've already filed the paperwork." She snatched the paper, her hand shaking. "You're insane." "Maybe," I said, turning away, "but I'm also the landlord." As I walked back to my truck, the wind rustled through the trees, carrying the faint sound of Karen's outrage behind me. I smiled to myself, thinking of all the years my family's land had been forgotten, paved over, and sold to people who thought rules only applied to others. Now, the ground beneath their million-dollar homes finally remembered who it belonged to. But this was only the first move, because revenge, like ownership, is best established in writing. And I had just begun drafting the eviction notices. The eviction notices arrived on a Tuesday, neatly typed, stamped with county seal, and hand-delivered to every household whose yard crossed the thin red line of my property. I didn't relish the drama of the mailman's face when Mrs. Halvorsen opened his and read the words aloud like a hymn. I relished the results. Effective immediately, the first notice declared, use of the following parcels constitutes an authorized occupancy of private land. Compensation is required for prior and ongoing use. Please contact the owner to arrange terms. That phrasing was deliberate. I wanted to be lawful, cold, and administrative, because there is something infuriatingly efficient about paper. It carries an authority human temper tantrums can never match. When Karen saw the envelope with my return address, the color drained out of her perfect bronzer. She read it standing on her front porch, one manicured eyebrow climbing like a question mark. "You can't do this," she stammered, folding and unfolding the letter as if heat might erase the ink. "I already did. I said calmly, walking up her walk like I owned the air. You'll need to schedule a meeting with my office to negotiate a license for continued use, or you can remove the offending structures by the 30th. She opened her mouth, closed it, and then, in a move that was thrilling in its predictability, tried to rouse the neighborhood. This is an outrage. It is extorting us, she cried into her phone, broadcasting to anyone who would listen. She called for emergency board meetings, county representatives, and anyone who might stop the inevitable. They showed up, of course, people clutching casseroles and HOA rule books like talismans. The board convened under the community gazebo, whispers buzzing like lightning bugs. I could have barged in and narrated the truth myself, but patience is a weapon. I let them stew. In the days that followed, I painted no villains. I let the paperwork do their dirty work. The rental terms I proposed were reasonable. A modest fee that would be applied retroactively to the date Willow Creek had begun maintaining the park, an agreement to indemnify the HOA for future maintenance on the 5 acres, and a clause requiring advance notice and permits for any new construction within the boundary lines. You have to understand, this wasn't about money. Money was a measure of accountability. The thrill was watching entitlement learn the currency of consequence. At first, Karen tried lawsuits, small, spiteful, messy filings meant to gum up the machine. She produced a buyer's remorse affidavit, questioned signatures, and paraded a real estate agent who claimed the developer had sold him a community parcel. Each motion was dismissed fast. The title was clear, the deed indisputable, county archives unambiguous. The judge's expression when he called out the surveyor's stamp maps was a kind of quiet vindication that tastes like iron and honey at once. When litigation failed, she escalated to sabotage. Someone, Karen, or someone doing her bidding, cut the string lights from the gazebo at night. Another evening, red paint smeared a corner of my posted sign. A third time, someone left dog waste neatly arranged along the path where folks used to jog. Vandalism is a confident person's weapon. It assumes the other will fold. I didn't fold. I changed tactics. I took the high ground and installed a low one. First, the easement petition. I filed a public petition to reclassify a narrow swath of my land as protected riparian corridor. Simple language, heavy on ecology, citing the creek and the willows and the owls. Conservation appeals have a funny way of rewriting priorities. The county placed a temporary hold on any significant construction, which meant Karen's plans to expand her playground or lay that new patio were legally frozen. Next, community engagement. I held an open history and restoration day, inviting the whole neighborhood to come walk the original property lines. I brought the old photos, my grandfather planting the oak, my father with a tractor, a black and white of the creek when trout still kissed the surface. People came out curious. They walked, they pointed, and most importantly, they listened. The story shifted from a legal curiosity to a human memory. Neighbors began to see the land as a piece of history they hadn't known they were standing on. Karen's strategy, insult, accuse, intimidate, fell apart when faces in the crowd began nodding at me instead of at her. There was a photo of my grandfather, sunburned and laughing, taped to a folding table. Mrs. Halvorsen, who'd originally been ready to join Karen's camp, stood near the creek and actually cried when she saw the picture, apologizing to me with a quiet, embarrassed voice. I didn't know, she said, and it was like someone had closed a book. That book slammed shut on Karen with the kind of thud that wakes children. Public sentiment shifted, but stubbornness is a habit. Karen doubled down on petty cruelty. She organized a petition to have my property resurveyed at our expense and handed out flyers that painted me as a developer in disguise. People who had once cheered for truth started to waver. Old loyalties are heavy, so I changed the tonal volume. I staged a kindness that was a trap. During a late afternoon thunderstorm, I saw Karen struggling at the community mailbox. Her Subaru's battery had died. The delivery driver and 2 men in polos walked past, leaving her stranded. Something inside me, less revenge, more the memory of what my father would have done, pushed me to cross the street with jumper cables. She looked at me, astonished. Are you serious? I clipped the cables and let the engine cough to life. Her face was a storm of relief and fury, a combination that made me laugh because anger without control looks ridiculous. You could have let me rot, she said. I could have, I said, But I'd rather not be the kind of man who does. Settlements paperwork, medicine that tastes bad but helps. The next week, in a strange and small twist of irony, Karen began to call me to mediate neighborly squabbles. She'd find herself at my door, furious, and would sit on the stoop and negotiate. There's an extraordinary humility that comes with losing the moral high ground. It makes people reasonable. The resolution itself was a kind of art. The HOA agreed to a 5U license, nominal monthly payments that would finance a small fund for creek maintenance and community improvements, money that, ironically, came from the same folks who'd been most indignant. They agreed to move certain structures, adjust fence lines, and pay for a professional landscape plan that respected both their desire for tidy lawns and my wish to keep a natural buffer line intact. Karen had to sign the agreement in front of a camera at the county office. The footage, her signature, the way she smoothed the paper afterward like a woman trying to iron out embarrassment, went viral in our small town. People shared it with a mix of schadenfreude and relief. The board elected a new president, and Karen's tenure ended like a shriek under a lawnmower. But the best part, the part I'd rented out in my head like a small theater for months, came the day I installed a bench. At the edge of a restored riparian corridor, beneath the oak with my grandfather's initials, I set a simple wooden bench and carved into it, for those who remember where they came from. I invited the neighborhood to a small dedication, lemonade, cookies, and a ribbon cutting. Karen showed up too, of course, standing awkwardly like a woman who'd been publicly reimbursed for her rage. Derek, the young guy who'd first read the records aloud at the HOA meeting, gave a short speech. He talked about community, responsibility, and the odd poetry of the land finding its way home. When he finished, people clapped. Karen clapped last, her hands slow and precise, like she was learning applause. I stood under the oak, hand in my pocket, and felt something loosen. Revenge, I discovered, is best served not as a meal but as a reckoning. It's not about humiliation alone. It's about restoring the ledger. They had treated my family's land as an afterthought. I'd made them acknowledge it. As the sun sank, a little boy ran ahead of his mom to sit on the bench. He looked out at the creek with a kind of dreamy concentration that adults forget how to make. "Is this the same creek from the picture?" he asked his mother. "It is," she said. I watched them. I watched Karen leaning against a fence that was now within her legal boundary, arms folded, eyes softer than the first day I'd met her. For a moment, we were both just people watching the world go on. The feud had not burned whole. It had singed edges and grown new green. I didn't gloat. I didn't dance on anyone's metaphorical lawn. I walked the property line with the surveyor one last time, boots sinking into earth that had been through too many